now. So just a quick introduction again. This is Crid Fung, and I'm interviewing George Hirosaki. And maybe you could just introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm George Hirosaki, the A.J. Hartsook Professor in Chemical Engineering in the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at Rice University.
All right. Thank you for having the interview today. I guess I just want to start off by just asking a really basic question. Just maybe tell me a little bit about yourself, maybe starting with sort of a little bit of family background or history, just to how you came to live in Texas.
Maybe we should start with how the family came to Texas.
Okay.
My grandfather visited Texas in 1906, over 100 years ago. He was interested in owning land. And in California, or the West Coast, Japanese could not own land. But in Texas, they welcomed having a Japanese rice farming colony. And so he bought land in Orange County, which is about 100 miles east of here. And then in 1907, he brought his rest of his family, his son, my mother, and his wife, and along with a number of other settlers, and formed the Kishi colony in Orange County. And so that was how we came to being in Texas.
Okay.
And I was born in 1939, and I started school in 1946, which is 1 year after World War II is over. And so that was had a very defining effect on my life.
Mm-hmm.
When we were preschoolers, we spoke just Japanese at home because my grandmother only spoke Japanese.
Okay.
And then my father and grandfather were more comfortable speaking Japanese than English. And so at home, just Japanese was being spoken.
Right.
But then when I went to school, first of all, my brother went to school. He didn't know English, and so he had difficulty. When I went to school, I found that kids would point their finger at me and call me Jap. And they would buzz their hand over my head and say, "Bomb Tokyo." And so I learned that Jap meant the enemy. And so that I told them, I'm not Jap, I'm a Japanese American. I was born here in Texas. And most of the kids understood, but those that didn't, I interpreted as they were saying, I'm their enemy, or they're my enemy. And I felt like I had no recourse but to fight them because they were denying who I was.
Right.
And so after a few fights, then they knew my position. I had no more trouble with that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, my siblings weren't as fortunate. They kept on getting picked on.
Oh, I see. Could you talk more about, I guess, the other members of your family, just really quick? You said you had some siblings? I
had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. And the boys came first and the girls afterwards. But my older brother, when he was the one that started school, he knew no English. But what I remember was that, what I recall was that he would come home from school crying that the kids on the bus were picking on him. And then, and one of our neighborhood girls that were a little bit older would defend him. And so that's some of the recollection that we had.
Okay. And so you are the middle brother?
Middle brother, and
Right.
then the second of 6 children.
Second of 6 children. Okay. So after the war, in going to school, I guess tensions are still running a little high in terms of, I guess, perceptions of Japanese Americans back then. As you progress through school, I mean, maybe just talk about your progression from elementary school to later to high school. Did things change?
Well, the kids knew where I stood, and so they treated me with respect. They knew what not to say. But there was one school bus driver that substituted for his wife, and he stopped the bus half a mile from our house, opened the door, and I told the bus driver, I said, Mrs. Harrington takes us to our house. He said, "You Japs can walk." And so we had no recourse but to get off the bus and walk half a mile to our house.
I see.
And I remember I was so angry, I threw a rock at the bus as it left and told my parents about it, but they wouldn't do anything.
Right.
And then many years later, I found out that same corner, that's where they put up the road name Jap Lane.
Oh.
And it's no longer there. We had that changed in
I
like
see.
2006.
That's
But no, that added more insult to the injury. And my, as I mentioned to you earlier, that my siblings wouldn't fight when they would be called Jap. And I can remember my sister one time wanted to bleach her skin, felt self-conscious about being so dark. And then I remember that as adults, my sisters were talking about without the knees. Someone used the word without the knees. What they meant was that Japanese without the knees is Jap. And they felt so sensitive they couldn't even use the word themselves. They would just refer to it as without the knees. And so it's some people, they think that was the popular word to use during World War II, but it had a strong impact on our family, on my siblings, myself and my siblings. And so this is why there were two roads in Texas, one named Jap Road, one named Jap Lane. Jap Road was in Jefferson County, which is adjacent to Orange County.
Okay.
And Jap Lane was the road where my grandfather originally settled, and we referred to as the Old Farm Road.
Right.
And then, well, the road names have been changed, but after much, it didn't come easy.
Right.
There was a Japanese American whose name was Sandra Tanamachi, lived in Beaumont. She tried in the 90s to change the name of Jap Road in Jefferson County, but with no success at that time. And then in the about 2004 time period, she tried to get again. This time, it was a much broader action. It was not just herself. It was a Japanese American Citizen League, and I was the president at that time. And then other civil rights organizations, like particularly the Anti-Defamation League, the NAACP, the and number of civil rights groups teamed together to see about changing the road name. And finally, we're able to convince them that they should have a hearing on the subject of the road name. And then the Commissioners Court called a hearing, and then they allowed each side to have 3 minutes to give their opinion. They would just alternate one side and the other. And so that went on for something like 3 hours. And then the opposition finally ran out of people, and so we just kept on having our side continue giving their point of view. And then the Commissioners Court voted, and the vote was all for changing the road name, with the exception of the commissioner whose district was where the road was, and he voted to keep it the same because the residents on the road were opposed to changing the name of the road.
I see.
And their claim, the reason for the objection was that they felt like if they were to change the name of the road, they were conceding that the word Jap was a racist name, and that implies that they were racist, and they were denying that they were racist. And to vote for a change, they felt like there was an admission to being racist, and this is why they were so adamant in their opposition to changing it.
Okay, I see. And were most of the people living that were against this change, had they been longtime residents of the area?
What number of the people were longtime residents, and there was a Japanese family that was there, like during the early part of the 20th century, and then they were quite popular with the local residents, and they eventually went back to Japan, but because they got along well, they they thought to, quote, honor them, they would call it Jap Road.
I see.
But what's interesting is that there's a intersecting road that's called Burrell-Wingate Road. You know, they would name the other roads in terms of the family names, but this road, they would just call it Jap Road instead of calling it Mayumi Road. And what we were asking for was, can you just name it after the family name of the settlers instead of using the word Jap Road? And they refused to do that because they felt like that would be a mission of that were racist. They were saying, you know, how they loved the Mayumi family, and then they wanted to keep it the same so as to honor them, but yet they didn't want to name it after the family name. And so after the Commissioner's Court required them to change the name, they chose to name it I think Boondocks Road.
Okay.
And name that was the name of a restaurant that was on that road.
Okay.
And they would do that rather than honor the name of the family that had originally settled that road. So which makes you wonder, were they really interested in honoring the original settler?
Right. I just want to go back to maybe talking a bit more about your hometown. Were there a lot of other Japanese Americans or Japanese families near your area? You said, I guess there were some in Jefferson counties?
Well, there were a large number of families that went through the Kishi colony whenever the colony was active.
Okay.
Now, that was from starting in 1907 until 1932, whenever my grandfather lost ownership of the land due to bankruptcy or because of foreclosed mortgage. He lost the land. And so after that, then the families scattered to different places. But the Nagai family and the Kondo family still continued to live in the area. The Nagai families in Vidor, which is where it used to be next door. And then later they moved to Vidor. And then the Kondo family moved to Fournette. And so they were the only families during the time that I was growing up.
Okay.
But earlier on, there were many families that passed through there, and several of the families that are here in the Houston area had arrived through the Kishi colony when they first came to the U.S.
Okay. Now, since you grew up around your grandparents and your parents, and they both spoke Japanese, did you feel like you were able to sort of retain that ability to sort of connect with them in a way? Because what I'm saying is, do you feel like there's maybe a cultural gap between maybe you and your parents and your grandparents, or did you feel like it was a pretty close connection you had with them?
Well, my grandmother died when I was still quite young,
Okay.
maybe like 10 years old.
Okay.
My grandfather died when I was maybe like 14 or 15 or so.
Okay.
And so I didn't really get to know them. You know, they were like grandparents, but it's as far as having serious conversations with them, we didn't. We were more like we were children.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as my parents, that after we started school, we would no longer speak Japanese, and so our parents would speak to us in English.
Oh, I see.
And they wanted us to speak proper English rather than so they didn't speak Japanese to us at home.
I see.
It was only much later, after my father retired and then he was becoming elderly, then he became more comfortable with Japanese than English. Then when I'd come home to visit, he would speak to me in Japanese. My mother would translate, and I said, "It's all right, you don't need to translate, I know what he's saying."
Mm-hmm.
But my father's style of Japanese, I could understand what he was saying. It's different than most Japanese that I hear right now. I can't, well, maybe it's been 30 years since my parents have died.
Right.
But I remember at the time that I could understand my father perfectly well.
And along with you and the rest of your siblings, uh, can everybody have the same level of understanding Japanese that you do?
Which is quite poor. You said the level of understanding
Okay.
is very minimal.
Okay.
And to give you an idea of how minimal, is that before we went to visit our cousins in Japan,
I see.
Darlene and I went to continuing education and took Japanese 1. And then the next time that we went to visit again, we were going to take Japanese 2, but then we weren't comfortable in Japanese 2. We had to go back to Japanese 1.
I see.
And then the third time, again, we started off in Japanese 2, but again, we had to revert back to Japanese 1.
Okay.
By not using it regularly, we couldn't retain it. And so right now that I can't converse in Japanese.
Mhm.
Now, the only thing that I can retain fluently is counting from 1 to 40 in Japanese, because when we do our exercise in the morning, we count in Japanese.
Right.
But in conversation, it's difficult. But yet, when I hear the words, that I can still recognize many of the words when I hear it. I know what they're saying, if they pronounce it the same way as my parents did. And then when we're studying Japanese, we studied, I learned the alphabet in hiragana and katakana.
Mhm.
The kanji, I never got the kanji, but the hiragana and katakana, I remember memorizing the alphabet. So when we travel in Japan, we go to a train station, we can see the train stop written in hiragana and then recognize where we are. And we'd have to pronounce it and then think about the letters and then say, oh, that's where we are, and comparing it to our maps. But that's about the extent of my Japanese language understanding.
So, amongst your siblings, did you mainly converse in English?
Only.
Only in English?
Yeah,
Did you ever mix a little or anything? Like, I guess mix maybe a few Japanese words with your predominantly English speech?
well, things like food, we would
yeah.
use a Japanese word.
Okay.
But in conversation, we just we spoke just in English, because at that time we were trying to integrate. We were people would pick us out as the enemy, and even though our friends would be nice to us, but there would be other people that they would make their comments, and we knew what they were talking about. And so that we're quite sensitive to our ethnic background.
So, could you go maybe a little more now towards your education path, let's say from high school and then on to college and then into your first job?
Mm-hmm. Well, I went to Vider, which isn't like one of the scholastic powerhouses like you find in Houston. And in fact, at my senior year, that I was only one of 2 students that applied for trigonometry, so I couldn't even take trig in high school. I had to take it without credit my freshman year in college. But nevertheless, that I think one thing that helped me in my education was that when I was in middle school, I had a science teacher who was teaching one year, taking a break from his PhD studies, and instead of just teaching general science, he taught chemistry, and that got me interested in chemistry. And at home, my brother happened to have a chemistry set, and so I started doing experiments to find out more what chemistry was about. And I discovered my father had a college chemistry book, and they had things like inorganic, organic chemistry, and so I started buying chemicals, doing all kinds of experiments, doing organic synthesis. I was synthesizing organic molecules before I ever took high school chemistry. And so whenever I took high school chemistry, it was stuff that I already knew how to do. And I dropped it in the beginning, but I finally finished it, taking the course when I realized I needed it if I'm going to major in chemical engineering. And then, so when I started college, it was obvious that if I'm looking for a career, that something I knew very well was chemistry, and something I could do very well in was mathematics, even though I didn't have very much background in mathematics. And so if you're strong in chemistry and strong in math, then a very obvious career path is chemical engineering. And so that's what I majored in at Lamar. Lamar Tech is now at Lamar University. And so getting my bachelor's degree, and so I got a BS in chemical engineering, graduated with honors, but I felt like I didn't really understand. I was just taught how to do things, but there were all these formulas in the textbooks. I didn't understand how they came about. It was like plug in the formula, so I wasn't really satisfied intellectually with the understanding I got as an undergraduate. And so that's when I decided I'm going to come to graduate school and understand how does this knowledge come about. I'd rather be the creator of the knowledge rather than just a user of the knowledge. And so that's when I decided to go to graduate school. And then I came to visit Rice and interviewed Ricky Kobayashi. And but when I first told my father I was thinking about going to graduate school and I was interested in going to Rice, and he said, well, look up one of the Kobayashi boys, that they're on the faculty at Rice. And it turned out it was Ricky Kobayashi, and he was in chemical engineering. So I came to visit him in 1963. And so that I was accepted into graduate school. And I found that it was such a mind-expanding experience that I was saying, gosh, I would just keep on discovering how all of these things happen. That it felt like it was like before I was just following recipes, and then I came to graduate school and I found out how these recipes come about. That I could be the person that makes the recipes, and so it was just a completely different intellectual climate than what I'd been used to before. And that's why, when I decided I'm going to go to industry first, but I want to come back here and be faculty someday. And I thought it was presumptuous as a student to say I want to become a faculty. So I waited a few years, then I came to visit the campus and told them of my interest. And then 1977, they offered me a chance to teach part-time. So I taught part-time from 77 to 93, then became full-time faculty in 93.
Going to college, first Lamarck and then Rice. And I know you mentioned that you knew a Japanese American at Rice. Again, going to these two different environments, how did the people around you sort of handle your ethnicity? Because by now, going to college, some years have passed since the war. Sort of, have things changed? Have things were there still some struggles, or did you feel like maybe people had a better understanding about you now? It wasn't just you were the enemy or anything like that.
There was no more problem, no one picking on us being Japanese American after, in my case, after just elementary school. But my sisters said that even when they were in high school, they would hear comments from teachers, not other students. They would say something about the Japs. And but we didn't hear anything derogatory that I know of after leaving high school. But I didn't hear anything more derogatory after like the first grade, because I would fight, and they knew where I stood.
Right.
And what's interesting is that while I was still in high school, I wanted to join the Marine Corps, but not active duty for 4 years, but 6 months active duty and then being in the reserves. And my parents were very reluctant to let me join the Marine Corps, but they permitted me to join the Marines. And then after I went to the Marine Corps, then I discovered that the Marines are who fought the Japanese in the Pacific. And then And but I got not a single derogatory words from any of the Marines. They would take me aside and tell me how much respect they had for the Japanese soldiers. And they said especially the Japanese Marines they had to be 6 foot tall to be Japanese Marine. I'm 6 foot tall, and so they were impressed by my size. And they said just how terrific of a fighter that they were. And they said that most of them were from Hokkaido, the northern island. And so they treated me with respect. No Marine ever called me a Jap. They would take me aside to let me know how much respect that they had of the Japanese soldier, and I think of that I would come and join the Marine Corps. But I think that me joining the Marine Corps was my response to, as early as a child, being denied being American.
Right.
That the Marines, to join the Marines who fought the Japanese during the World War II, is saying that I am an American, and I'll put my life on the line as American if necessary. And so I think the Marines knew that they wouldn't dare say anything derogatory to me, because it's very unusual. In the whole time I was in the Marine Corps, I knew no other person, no other Japanese American Marine.
Were there any other, I guess, Asians that you trained with?
Not that I recall. There were very few Asians in the United States at that time.
Okay. And this is around what year again?
It was 1956.
56.
Let me see, 57 when I first joined, and I went to active duty in 58. And there were lots of Japanese Americans and Chinese Americans on the West Coast, but I didn't see a single, I don't recall seeing a single Asian American in the Marine Corps.
And when you were on active duty, where did they place you?
In San Diego for boot camp and Camp Pendleton for active duty.
Okay.
And it was during peacetime, so there was no, I wasn't in foreign soils. But it was during that time that the Marines landed in Beirut, Lebanon, because they were having a civil war. But when the Marines landed with their landing crafts, they were met on the beach by children who was enjoying the show. And then in mainland China was bombing Quemoy. I remember at the time, whenever the Marines landed in Lebanon, we were a little bit anxious because we were in the first month of boot camp. And then in the third month of boot camp, the mainland China bombed Quemoy. And then there were things were getting tense. And we were ready to go. So call in the Marines. We're ready to go. And so during that time, our attitude had changed very much. But we were ready to show what we could do.
So, just for clarification, so did you join the Marines after you graduated from college?
No, I joined while I was a junior in high school.
While you were a junior in high school.
And then 6 months active duty. The summer and the fall semester was in the Marine active duty. And then the spring semester I signed up for starting at Lamar University, Lamar Tech. Because after spending boot camp and 1 month of infantry training, it made me think a lot more about my career. It said that is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? Or do you want to do something that's a little bit more intellectually demanding? And so when I came home on leave, the first thing I did was sign up for the spring semester. So I knew then that I definitely must go to college. And so I guess that it was a real awakening for me that it was time to grow up and make some career decisions. That may have been fun for a short time, but then I need to think about the long-term career.
So then you've come to Houston and you attend Rice for grad school. And you mentioned that you knew a guy by the name of
Ricky Kobayashi. Yeah.
Was he from your area, or?
Ricky's father came to United States, was a mechanical engineer. So he went to San Francisco, and that was about the time they had the San Francisco earthquake. And so he finally came to Texas and settled in the Webster area near the NASA, where the NASA Space Center is, and on the colony founded by Isibra. And so, and he was truck farming in the colony. And so my father had discussed cucumber culture with Ricky's father. And he had, I believe it was 8 children. And since my father knew his father, he knew about several of the Kobayashi kids went to either Rice or Texas A&M. And he knew that Ricky was at Rice. And it just so happened that Ricky was a chemical engineer, and so he helped enable me to be enrolled into graduate studies. And also when I joined the faculty here, that we partnered together on a research project on using NMR to measure the properties of live crude oils. And so that he already had the NMR facilities, and then and Shell was interested in using NMR for well logging, so I was able to put the two together and get started on a research project right away by partnering with Ricky Kobayashi.
Could you tell me more about just sort of your work at Shell as well, and sort of the just your overall career, I guess?
When I was a child, I thought that the oil industry would not be a place I would want to work, because I grew up very close to Orange Field, where my grandfather had some production at one time. And there, I remember the oil fields as being black, dirty, the oily water, oily soil, pipes, pumps, and it looks like just a very messy place, low-tech industry. And so I thought that, well, I'm going to go into the chemical industry, which is much more high-tech. And then when I came to graduate school, I was interested in the mathematics of fluid flow. And then so I took on as a PhD project solving the Navier-Stokes equation. That's the equations for fluid flow in 3 dimensions. I said, I was on the Rice-Baylor Artificial Heart Program. This is between Rice and DeBakey in the Methodist Hospital, or in the Baylor College of Medicine. But I was going to do research on blood flow, but then I realized that there's no way to solve the fluid flow equations, the Navier-Stokes equations in 3 dimensions. And so to do that, I said, I think I know how to develop the theory and the computational methods to be able to do that. And so I took that on as my thesis. And then, when I was ready to graduate, I went interviewing, and I thought I wanted to go work with Shell in the West Coast, because they were doing some good research. And they said, well, if you can do this kind of work, the people who would really value your talents are back here in Houston, in Bel Air, at the Bel Air Research Center. And so I interviewed with them and found out, they were the ones that were really excited about my know-how. And so then I ended up interviewing the other oil companies, Exxon, Amoco, let's see, Chevron. Let's see, I interviewed also at Oak Ridge. In a way, I had like 6 offers, and then I narrowed it down to just between Exxon and Shell. And then, and I had the skills in numerical simulation that Shell needed very badly. Exxon already had the skills, and so if I want to make a big impact, I would make a much bigger impact at Shell. So that's why I decided to go with Shell. And then I started doing research in that area. And probably my greatest contribution was getting Shell up to world class in doing reservoir simulation. And then my last task in simulation was that I went to the Hague, the Netherlands, where Shell was headquarters, and then I taught it was a 2 or 3 week class to the Shell engineers from all over the world on how to use the simulator that we had developed. And then after that, I moved on to other things. And so I went to Los Angeles after that to work 2 years in the operating company. And then I returned back to research and had worked on enhanced oil recovery, which is the research that I'm doing right now, and plus a number of other topics. So during the 70s and 80s was a time whenever enhanced oil recovery was very exciting to the industry. Because during the 70s, that's whenever, when I first went to work at Shell, the price of oil was something about like $2 or $3. No, it's about $3 a barrel. And then during the mid 70s, that's whenever we had the Arab embargo. There was a revolution in Iran, and then Iran decided to embargo the United States, and so it cut off the imports to the United States. And then well, I can't remember how much was the Iranian, and it's referred to as the Arab embargo. So I don't know how much was Iranian, how much were the other Arab countries. But at this time, the United States didn't have enough petroleum, and there would be long lines at service stations. The service stations would run out of gas, and people would line up to try to fill up. And they were rationing gasoline, and you could go to the station only on, depending on your license plate, if it was odd or even number, you could go on odd or even days. And they were trying to do something to control the long lines at the service stations. And so that was the atmosphere that I got into enhanced oil recovery. And so by 1980, the nation was mobilized to try to do something. We had what we called was energy independence. And then the United States wanted to get independent of foreign imports. But this didn't last very long. Pretty soon that interest waned, and Nixon was the one who wanted to was promoting energy independence. But then he resigned from presidency, and after that, Gerald Ford took over after him, but Jimmy Carter was then elected. And then it turned out that there was an era where the politicians viewed the oil industry as the enemy, and then there was, so instead of trying to get oil energy independence, they were trying to get more like punished oil companies for having such high prices.
Right.
And then in 1986, that's when Saudi Arabia decided that, well, during that time, that's whenever the United States was trying to develop oil from oil shale, and Canada was trying to develop oil from the tar sands, or what they call the oil sands. And these would have been alternative supplies that could have made the Americas independent of the imports from the Middle East. But then the response of the OPEC was that let's open up the spigots and then just flood the market with cheap oil. And so then the price of oil went up to $40 a barrel in like the mid 80s, and then in the 90s it dropped down to something like $11 a barrel, and tried to squeeze out these alternative energy sources. And the oil shale got squeezed out, but the tar sands didn't stop. They kept on going. And so now that the price of oil is coming back up again, the the oil sands is a big booming business. And then they're trying to import the oil from the oil sands all the way here to Baytown and Port Arthur. It's only the President and the Secretary of State that's holding up approving that pipeline. And now the United States is importing something like 60% of the of its petroleum needs, and they're trying to get less dependent on the Middle East, but still is very highly dependent on imports for meeting its energy needs.
So this need for alternative energy has been around for a while then, this sort of wanting to become energy independent, and it seems to me like that's what you've always sort of been primarily focused on, or issues such as these. Just, I guess you said oil recovery, right?
Well, working for Shell, oil and gas recovery was our business. And then from very early on, we recognized that if you use just conventional technology, you recover only like 1/3 of the oil. You leave 2/3 behind. And then you know that it's there. Now, you've discovered it. It's not a matter of gambling, trying to find something you don't know is there, because you know it's there. But it's just a matter of technology. And so you have to develop the technology. Two things. First is technology. Second, it's economics. And so first you have to develop the technology, and the second, the economics has to be right to be able to make use of it. And so I was aware that the day is going to come when it's going to be necessary to recover this other 2/3 rather than just walking away from it. And now the world is coming to that recognition. During the 70s and 80s, it's mostly the United States that was trying to do enhanced oil recovery. Now it's all over the world, and then the rest of the world may be taking the leadership away from the United States. The United States, the major oil companies left these old fields to small independent operators. And then it was the large oil companies that had the technology that could do these processes. Now the small operators, they don't have research organizations. And they do conventional technology and try to do it more cheaply than the major oil companies. And so it's, all over the rest of the world, most of the petroleum resources are owned by national oil companies. And then the national oil companies are trying to gain the technology so they could start applying enhanced oil recovery to make the most of their domestic resources. The other countries of the world recognize petroleum as a valuable natural resource that they need to conserve and try to make the most of it. Mm-hmm. The United States doesn't take the same view. They just want to get the cheapest oil possible. But this is why the other countries of the world is now doing what the United States was doing during the 70s and 80s. And that's why when I go to meetings, it's usually outside the country instead of in the United States. It's now very international.
Could you talk about the transition from sort of working at Shell, having a part-time job at Rice, and then transitioning later to full-time professorship at Rice University, and just, sort of that chapter of your life as well?
When I first started teaching part-time, I remember that the first time I taught, the effort to prepare the notes was just so horrendous that I can remember staying up late every night trying to prepare the notes, that after I finished, I said, I don't think I want to do this anymore. And then, so Rice said, okay, we'll find someone else. But they couldn't find anyone else to teach it. And then, and so they asked me, well, can I go back and teach it? So, well, since I've done it the first time, maybe the second time would be easier, and it was easier once you had the original notes prepared. And then it started getting to be more fun. I like explaining things, and so I enjoyed teaching the courses all through the 70s and 80s. And sometimes I had some really large classes, not just chemical engineering, but the people in applied math, and a lot of them came. A lot of people came from industry, and so I was able to reach out to a lot of people. But all this, but this was still part time, and then in the 80s there were, well, in the 70s, 80s. Whenever research, there was demand for research, it was really fun doing research. It's like I didn't want to give that up. But then after 1986 and the price of oil dropped, then there was less interest in research. And in fact, they just considered research to be just an expense. And they wanted to reduce the expenses. And I can remember at one time, the motto of the company was return to profitability. Shell never lost money for a whole year, but there was like 2 quarters when it was in the red. And so they were just interested in reducing expenses rather than doing research. At that time, it wasn't very much fun doing research, and I was getting ready to move on. And so then the time was right for me to make the move. They weren't interested in research. They wanted to reduce expenses, and then I had already another career waiting for me, whereas a lot of my colleagues said if they got laid off, they'll be out of a job. And so I felt it'd be a lot better for me to go to something I wanted to do and had an opportunity than to hold on to the position and let someone else be laid off. And so then that's when I made the transition to academia. And so the first few years, I remember it was tough. It was lots of work, and it was hard to get research support because during that time the price of oil was so low that the oil industry wouldn't support anything, and even the Department of Energy wouldn't support research in trying to increase recovery, because they say, well, the world is flooded with oil, why should we do research? And that was sort of the attitude that they had. And so during my first years at Rice, I was working on aquifer remediation, cleaning up Superfund sites using the same technology we use for enhanced oil recovery. And then things started happening. Someone from Mobil sent me a check, said, here, continue doing the same research like you were doing when you were at Shell. And then Shell and Schlumberger got together, said, here, we'll buy you a NMR spectrometer if you use it to do research and measuring rock and fluid properties using the NMR. And so that formed a nucleus that said, okay, well, maybe let's form a consortium. And then so that donation of the NMR spectrometer was in 95, 96, I formed a consortium. And now we have, I think, 11 or 12 companies that are a member of the consortium, and it's quite a large group. Last year we had a total of 80 people at the consortium meeting.
What is the consortium? What's the name of the consortium?
It's a Processes in Porous Media. I didn't call it just enhanced oil recovery because when I started, we had no research in enhanced oil recovery. We were doing aquifer remediation, but I was working on NMR well logging. But what was common in all of this was flow in porous media, and so that's why I decided that. And also, I think there was already there may have been already a project that was called Processes in Porous Media, and so that may have been why I continued in that, and that was appropriate for what I was doing. But now things are different. Our federal government, other national oil companies, and the international oil companies, and even the independent oil companies, all interested in sponsoring research. So it's that there's no problem of funds for doing research. The problem is my time.
So now there's like this renewed interest in your work and your
Yes.
field.
But I have 13 PhD students, and then their PhD students are well, I have 3 PhD students, 3 staff, and I partner with several other faculty. But this has resulted in my time split, and these graduate students and staff also mentor undergraduate students. And so now we have so many people, so many projects, so many sponsors. My time is split multiple ways that I have a hard time focusing because that it's more of meeting obligations, meeting appointments, rather than focusing on something and working things through.
Wow.
So it's
Busier than ever.
yeah, it's busy, but not I'm not sure whether I'm getting the same satisfaction I got when I first started. When I first started, then I can remember the first project that Clarence and I had together was, we think that maybe that was the most intellectually satisfying project that we did in the early 90s, because we had only one. He had other students, but I had only one student
Right.
to begin with.
Right.
And then it got to be 2, 3, 4, 5, and now when it gets to 13, I think 13 may be a little too many. It's being divided too many different ways. And so fortunately, some of the students are graduating.
Right.
And
Right.
so we'll have 3, they'll be graduating this May, and then that'll reduce the load somewhat. And then the future students, I'll be co-advising with younger faculty rather than advising by myself.
Would you like to take a maybe quick water break, anything like that?
Okay, yeah, that might be good.
Okay. Now that I think we've covered your professional background in good detail, maybe we could talk more about sort of your personal life and sort of, I guess, maybe just a little bit about you and your wife and the rest of your family, things like that.
Mhm. Well, Darlene and I have been married, 18 years. I guess I can know the number of years because we got married 11 days or 10 days after I started on the faculty at Rice, and so the dates are the same. And so we met late in life, and so we don't have any of our own children. I was married before much earlier, but we didn't have any children. And so I met Darlene on a ski trip. And so we have a lot of the same interests. We still enjoy skiing. We both went skiing to Jackson Hole over spring break. And we've been going to Jackson Hole every winter for the last 9 years, since my nephew moved to Jackson Hole to live. And so it's and she enjoys doing other things too, like we're planning on bicycling around Japan this summer, and so we dusted off our bicycles starting last fall and been trying to get our body back in shape again to do long distance bicycling. And when we first met, I taught her how to windsurf, and then I've been windsurfing every summer in Maui since 1984, and so that's one of the things she had to do was to go windsurfing with me in Maui, and we did that till something like 2004, and so I did like 20 years windsurfing in Maui, and I still enjoy windsurfing, but I can't take the conditions of Maui any longer.
I see.
The last time I was windsurfing in Maui, I got catapulted and landed facing backwards and snapped my neck and was temporarily paralyzed and had to be towed to shore. And then when I got to shore, I couldn't stand up, and it took some time before I could walk again. And so the next year I had to have surgery. But I can still windsurf in Galveston Bay, so I still do that. I can still ski, and so I ski, but I don't do heli skiing any longer. And so I just ski do resort skiing or sometimes snowcat skiing.
So still leading a very robust, active lifestyle.
Oh yeah. Well, it's after I injured my neck, I couldn't run anymore, but I used to run just about every day, ever since. Well, I used to run track in high school, and then when I was a graduate student, I would run, and then because I had the gym facilities, but then whenever I started teaching part-time in 1977, one of the fringe benefits of being part-time faculty is I got the Rice card.
Right.
I could use the gym facilities. So then I started running again, and then so I used to run down North and South Boulevard, run around the campus. And it's like 3 miles around the campus, and so that was my routine had gotten to be that I would go to work something like 7 o'clock, and then about 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, I would come to Rice, go to the gym, change clothes, run around the campus, and then drive on home. And then at that time I was living north of Houston, so by that time the traffic would subside, and so that kept me in good shape. And so now, after injuring my neck, I can't run properly because I don't have the reflex to my feet has been damaged.
I see.
And so I tend to trip, but I can still bicycle.
Okay.
And so I use things like bicycling to stay in shape. And so I hope it didn't affect my skiing, so I hope to continue skiing as long as I can. I think my windsurfing, my footwork may not be as good, so I'm not as good windsurfing as I used to be, but I still try to keep that up as much as I can.
That's good. Good to hear that. How about I know that you're part of the Japanese American Citizens League,
Yes.
and you were president for a good 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
Could you maybe talk more about sort of not just the Japanese American Citizens League specifically, but also sort of how you've sort of kept in touch with your culture and your heritage to this day and over the years?
For a long time, I didn't have too much interest in visiting Japan. I had so many other things I wanted to do, like the skiing, mountain climbing, windsurfing. But then about, I guess, 10 or 15 years ago, I started getting more of an interest in finding out about my roots. I'm wondering, it's that my family history starts in Japan, and I've never been to Japan. And so it was about, I think, 1998 or so. It was maybe like 12 years ago, the first time I went to visit Japan. And now that we try to do it every opportunity that we get. And and so the first time I went to visit Japan, since it was the first visit, I went to visit all of my cousins. We went to Kyushu and visited 2 of the cousins over there. And then we had 5 cousins in Tokyo and visited with all of them. But I'm thinking that that trip maybe what triggered it was that I had a professional meeting in Japan. And then I gave the presentation at that professional meeting, but that gave me the excuse to visit the relatives while I was in Japan anyway. Mm-hmm. But it was such a good experience that we decided that we're not going to wait for professional trips. We'll plan trips just to go visit Japan. And then the next time we went to, did a tour of Japan. We found a tour company from Australia that was called Backcountries of Japan. And so it was, instead of just being in the big cities and going by bus, that we would go to the small towns and the mountains and the villages and go hiking. And then, and so see Japan like it was a long time ago, particularly go hiking into historical places. and that has lots of tradition. And so we've taken 2 walking tours such as that. One first time going from Osaka to Tokyo, and the next time it was sort of reverse direction. Some of the things were repeated, but there were still a number of new things. And then on the first time that we went to Japan, we climbed Mount Fuji.
Wow.
And none of my cousins had climbed Mount Fuji. They live there, but we came to visit Japan, and we had that as one of our goals. And so then our experiences visiting there has been just so good that we just keep on wanting to go back whenever we get a chance.
Are you do you have good, I guess, good relationships with sort of your relatives? It seems like you have a lot of relatives back in Japan, and you seem to know about them and stuff. I mean, have any other members of your family maybe have moved back and forth and maybe moved to Japan? Like that?
None have moved to Japan. They've visited Japan.
Yeah,
but we're Americans, would have trouble speaking the language, for one. And but we all enjoy visiting, finding our roots, because we've made several trips to Japan. One of the trips was I wanted to find out my mother's side of the family, because it's my cousins on my father's side that I went to visit the first time. On my mother's side, that we didn't know of any living relative. The last living relative that came to visit us had since passed away. But I knew the town, hometown, and by this time my parents were no longer living. But we knew that the Nagaoka, the city on the northern coast of Japan, was a sister city of Fort Worth. And then we knew the person in Fort Worth that was coordinating the sister city activity. And so we asked her, could she introduce us to someone that would help me find my great-grandfather's gravestone, and so I could visit his grave. And also knew my great-grandfather had founded a bank, and so could you introduce me to the bank so I can visit the bank that my great-grandfather had founded. And so she got me in contact with the Chamber of Commerce and Technology for Nagaoka. And then it turned out that we got a red carpet treatment, because they happened to be preparing to celebrate their centennial of their organization the next year. And it turned out that my great-grandfather was the founder of the parent organization for the Chamber of Commerce and Technology. And so we went to visit my great-grandfather was we went to visit the Museum of Science and Technology, maybe Society of Technology, that found out that there was what's called the Lamp Society. And of the end of the Shogun and the samurai period of Japan, and return to Emperor started after Commodore Perry went to open up Japan in like 1858 or something like that.
Yes.
Then soon after that, Japan had a civil war, and then overthrew the Shogun, and then returned the government back to the royalty, and then Nagaoka was in the losing side of that civil war. And then my great-grandfather helped rebuild the city after that, and so that's this starting of the Lamp Society was they call it Lamp Society because he imported lamps from Europe, and also he founded a petroleum company, and so that it would use petroleum oil in these lamps to help create an industry. And he gathered a number of the business people in the city to try to reconstruct the city, and then this was the founding of the Lamp Society. But also we learned that during that time, someone, a Nobel laureate of literature in Japan, wrote a play about this time. It's a play called 100 Sacks of Rice. During that time, the people were starving, and a neighboring clan that was better off donated them 100 sacks of rice. But the head of the clan, instead of just distributing the rice to feed the appetites of the people, he said, let's sell this rice and use the revenue to build schools for our children, and so our next generation may do better. And the samurai wanted to kill the head of the clan and distribute the rice, but the head of the clan was able to prevail, and they built a school. And then, and so this, because of that, this play was written, and Prime Minister Kazumi, which was several years ago,
Yes.
mentioned this in his inaugural address. And so now it's a very story that's well known throughout Japan. And then so when we went to visit, they gave us a copy of this play. And then you look at the cast of characters, and Yuichi Kishi, my great-grandfather, was the businessman who provided the house that the head of the clan lived in, and referred to the head of the clan as Sansei, or teacher. And so he was part of this very famous play. And he founded this bank that could provide the financial means for the business to reconstruct themselves. And he founded the petroleum company and a number of other things. And so it was a big revelation for us. And so we went to, and so they took us around to visit the museums, and we went to visit the cemetery where my great-grandfather was buried. And while visiting the cemetery, the wife of the former priest was there, and then and she said that she had a classmate that went to visit Texas, and it turns out her classmate was someone who went to Lamar University, and I picked up and brought them to visit my family.
Oh, okay.
When they said Hasi, then I knew that who they were talking about. And then we went to visit the Yamamoto Memorial Museum. World War II. Are you acquainted with the name Admiral Yamamoto?
Yes.
Yamamoto is from the same hometown, and so we went to. So his one of the most famous people of that town, and so we went to visit his memorial museum, and then I saw a big photo, mural-sized photo, and then I could see oil derricks. I said, that looks like Orange Field. Then I said, that looks like my grandfather. And so it was a photograph taken in 1984 when Yamamoto went to visit my grandfather in Orange Field.
Oh.
And then they showed me they had a caption, and it was in Japanese, but then they translated it for me and said that they discovered this picture. My brother had it in his artifacts that he caved after my parents died, and they passed things on to him. And then they also found the guest book, my grandfather's guest book, where Yamamoto had signed it, 1924. And so that they had his signature, and then they noted that they found this with my brother's archives. And then we went to the Museum of Technology, and then that's when we saw that his picture was with the founding of the Lamp Society. We could recognize the faces, and one of them was great-grandfather. And
see.
then
So-
they mentioned him by name as well.
So yeah, there's almost like a personal connection there to the hometown.
Yeah.
That's really good. That's really. That's been a
Well,
big
then
surprise.
they then wanted me to introduce me to a member of our family, and so that I didn't know that we had any remaining relatives, and so they brought us to a household, and then we started talking, and then we were both great grandchildren. We have the same great grandfather, and then and she was about the same age as I am. She was a widow, but she said, "Come the next day because her daughter and son-in-law and granddaughter are coming to visit." And so when they came to visit, the son-in-law was going to go study petroleum engineering at Stanford University.
Oh, okay.
And so that whenever he finished his studies, he came by and visited here.
Okay.
And so he's a petroleum engineer,
Right.
which is, that's my profession as well. And so that was a very memorable trip.
Yes.
And we had my cousin that's bilingual to go with us, and he translated for us because no one else really spoke English. It was only by my cousin going that he was able to translate. Now, when I visit my other cousins, none of the other cousins speak English, and so that we find conversation pretty challenging.
No challenging.
Even though the last time I visited with 4 of the cousins. There was 3 other cousins that they would speak in Japanese, we would speak in English, and somehow try to communicate.
And then finally, could you talk just a little bit about sort of your role in the Japanese American Citizens League and sort of the events you hold, and sort of the purpose of the organization?
It's the oldest Asian American civil rights organization in the United States, because it was founded in the 1920s because the Japanese Americans were treated pretty badly early during their history, because in the West Coast they couldn't own land, they couldn't become citizens, they couldn't even marry Caucasians. There were laws prohibiting intermarriage, and it was difficult for Japanese to get into the professions at that time, and so they formed this Japanese American Citizen League. And now, during World War II, there was quite a contentious period of time, because Japanese American Citizen League, the point took the position, we are Americans. We are Americans of Japanese descent, and we're loyal to America. There were a number of people that were sent to the intern camps that said, hell no, that we were innocent people, that put us in camps, took away our constitutional rights, that no way we were going to cooperate. And then the United States required everybody in the camps to sign a statement. It had 2 questions: that would you renounce the emperor, and will you pledge your loyalty to the United States? And then there were those that answered no to both questions, and they were shipped to Japan.
Oh, okay.
And then they were sent to a more high security camp and shipped to Japan. And then those that said, the others that said yes and yes. And then there was lots of tension between those 2 groups.
Right.
And then those that were saying yes is saying, we are Americans and we need to prove that we're American. And so whenever they started asking for volunteers, they said, let's volunteer for the military. And then, well, to go back, my cousin's husband said that he tried to volunteer for the Navy. They said they wouldn't take him. And so, but yet whenever they had to form the all Japanese American unit, the 442, then they were able to join that. But before that, they couldn't even join the military. They wouldn't take them. But in Hawaii, there was the 100th Battalion, which was, being from Hawaii, they're mostly Japanese Americans. And that formed the core group that decided that, well, what do you do with all of these Japanese Americans from Hawaii? And there wasn't enough space to put them all away, all the Japanese Americans away. And so they decided that they pledged their loyalty to America. And then they said that, well, maybe the mainlands will also do the same. And so then that's when they formed the 442. And then the 442, the Japanese Americans, many of them from these camps, volunteered to join the 442. And then they fought in Europe. And then one of the things that they're noted for was that, well, they did quite well in Italy and then through France. And then in France, they were assigned to the Texas 36th Division, which is the National Guard. But when they're in active duty, they were in 36th Division. And there was one battalion that was got isolated by the German troops. And then they tried to rescue them. They couldn't get connected with them. And then they couldn't get food, water. They were just isolated and near starvation. And then the American troops tried to rescue them, weren't successful, so they called in the 442. And then the 442 were able to go in and then rescue them. But they suffered more casualties than the number of troops that they saved. There were something like 260 troops that were surrounded. Mm-hmm. The total number of casualties was something like 700 to 800, and something close to 200 were killed trying to do the rescue. But they felt like they had to do this to prove their honor.
Right.
Their families were put away in camps, and they were distrusted, and they had a lot more at stake than the rest of the troops. And so that's why they took the greater, instead of just falling back whenever came under fire, they kept on going. And they're referred to as the most decorated unit in the history of the United States because of, by decorated probably meant how many Purple Hearts they got. Because they were getting not just one Purple Heart, they were getting multiple Purple Hearts. They'd get patched up and then sent back in again. And there were some units that started off with maybe like 170 people, and they ended up with only like 17 that were still standing after end of the fighting. And it's because of this, just this past year, the federal government and President Obama has signed a unit citation medal for the 442, the 100th Battalion, and also the MIS, this is Military Intelligence Service. These are the Japanese Americans that served in the Pacific as not as combatants but as intelligence service, the translation, and to help in the war in the Pacific. And one of the friend's father, a member of the JACL, was a member of the MIS.
I see.
And so that a lot of people probably don't realize that the Japanese Americans were even aiding in the Pacific. And my mother's cousin he wasn't in camp. He joined the Army. He was here in Houston, and he was a college graduate. And so he said he was working in the ship channel. And then people at the ship channel, they had the tall cranes.
Yes.
People trying to drop loads on top of them.
Oh.
And so he said, this is no way to live. And so he joined the Army. And since he was a college graduate, he was a commissioned officer. And so he went to Burma. And then when he was assigned to his company, his NCO said they wouldn't serve under him. They weren't going to serve under a Jap.
Right.
And so he had trouble getting them to come around and be willing to be under his command. And it said that during that time he would see the body of the Japanese troops, and he said they looked like it could be him.
Yeah.
He looked more like them than anyone else.
Could you tell me more about, I guess, what the JACL does today? And so, you know,
one of the things is to make sure that these things weren't forgotten.
okay.
And like last month, there was the presidential. We had the Day of Remembrance. This is actually
Right.
the Day of Remembrance of the day that President Roosevelt signed the order that permitted the relocation of all Japanese Americans from the West Coast. And it wasn't just Japanese citizens, it was including American citizens that had any ancestry, Japanese ancestry, even as little as 1/6. Even orphans that if they had any Japanese ancestry had to be relocated and sent to internment camps. And so that was unconstitutional, but at that time, and the constitutionality wasn't challenged till some time later. And so it wasn't just the aliens, it was the people that were Japanese Americans that were born in America or had to be relocated.
Right.
And so that so if we were to let things like that happen, then they could do the same thing with the Arab Americans or the Muslims.
Right.
And so that we say that these things don't happen to the Japanese Americans anymore, but we now extend it beyond just our own ethnic group, but to all ethnic groups, that it doesn't happen to other ethnic groups. And so that we've expanded our scope to more than just our own ethnic group now, because that the Japanese Americans are no longer discriminated against.
Right.
That's not the point. It's but to preserve that history and to see that no one else gets the same kind of treatment that we got during the early part of the history.
All right. Thank you, Professor Hirosaki, again for the interview.
You're welcome.
Hope I didn't take up too much of your time.
No problem.